Okay, the descending fifth sequence. That's what we're looking at here, and that's going to be the first big harmonic sequence that we're going to look at. This has been called the strongest progression in tonal music, meaning, well, what does that mean? The strongest progression in tonal music. Here's how I interpret that. Remember, a couple different times we've talked about tendency chords, right? 5 likes to go to 1, right? We know that. We know that from cadences. We know that from all kinds of different stuff. 5 likes to go to 1. So, we like our bass line to descend by fifths, to go 5, 1, right? That's a good feeling to us. So that's basically what's happening here over and over and over, where we get 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, right? So it's a whole bunch of 5 1s. So that feels very rewarding to us. This is a chord progression we like to hear. And we can do these in other ways, like I just said, too. We can do a descending 2 if we want, and we'll talk about that later. It has a bit more problems to it and is not as strong, right? Because going a descending 2 would be 1, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, right? And that doesn't have the same pull as that 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1 does. Okay, so a couple things to think about when we're looking at these kinds of sequences. We tend to think of them in pairs. So pairs of chords. So instead of looking at this whole thing, break it down into groups of 2. So we have a 1, 4, and you don't have to do this. This is just kind of a handy way to think. We have a 1, 4, we have a 7, 3, we have a 6, 2, and we have a 5, 1. Okay? When you do that, you can kind of see a descending second chord progression, right? Because look, 1, 4, and then 7, 3. If you look at the first chord of the sequence, what you're going to see is 1, 7, 6, 5, right? If you look at the second chord in the sequence, you're going to see 4, 3, 2, 1. So, when we look at these in 4-part harmony, we're going to be keeping track of all these resolutions and making sure that our 5-1 resolutions, all the implied 5-1 resolutions, which is like here to here, here to here, here to here, here to here, are all lining up. But thinking of them in pairs like that will help simplify that a little bit. I'll explain that more in just a second when we start putting notes on this stuff. One other thing to think about, though, that I just want to put in your head is that when we are in a sequence, some of the rules that we already know become a tad bit more relaxed. In particular, rules surrounding this diminished chord. We're going to kind of slide right through it. And so we might find that, for example, we learned a long time ago that we tend to not like the diminished chord to be in root position, right? If in a sequence like this, the diminished chord ends up falling into root position because of just the way we're sliding through all of these chords, that can be okay. You get a little bit of flexibility when you're in a sequence because you don't want to interrupt the pattern, right? If the pattern's working, the pattern's working, and that not putting a diminished chord in root position rule gets a little softer. The same thing in terms of once we have seventh chords here, and we're trying to figure out, well, actually, even without seventh chords, once we're trying to figure out what to double in 4-part, the doubling rules get a little laid back also because we're going to kind of fall into this pattern. It's like skiing, like if you're skiing down a hill, let's say cross-country skiing, you want to stay in the groove, right? Like you stay in these grooves and that makes everything smoother. If you go outside the groove, it starts to get a little bumpier, right? So you want your skis to stay in that groove and just go nice and smooth down the hill. That's what we're doing here. So if it means that we're going to hit a little bump with our rules for how we're dealing with some doublings, then, we just kind of want to stay in the groove and keep it going down through our sequence. So just remember that those rules get a little more relaxed. And what I was about to say about seventh chords, that is also true. So if the seventh ends up in the bass because of the pattern that we've emerged on occasion, that can be okay. If it's part of the sequence and it's moving, that's one I don't think we'll encounter. But if it was to happen, that could be okay. Okay, so just a couple general guidelines about how this is going to work. Now, for real now, let's put some notes on this thing so we can see this in action.